maybe just asking how you're doing since the fire. Terry was telling me about all of the craziness, and I was like, did you know the fire was coming, or how did that sort of play out?
It was the most terrifying thing, Mark. It was, I was home getting ready for work early in the morning. My nephew called me at 7:44. I'll never forget. He was working down in the valley and he saw smoke off in the distance about 20 miles away from town. And called me and said, just so you know, there's smoke over by the Concal Polga area. You might want to have a bag together. And I went, that's 20 miles away. What are you talking about? And but I picked up my cell phone. I always follow the fire scanner in the mountains, right? And there wasn't anything. So I went in my kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, fed the dog, all this stuff. And then I noticed that the phone had updated and they'd closed the bottom part of a road way at the edge of town down by the highway. And I figured, okay, they're going to keep people out of Concal. That's fine. Still didn't worry much about it. And about 10 minutes later, shoom, the phone lit up, evacuating Paradise. And I went, holy cow, they are really being conservative. It was a windy day, right? And I thought, wow, they're being very careful. So I start getting my stuff ready, call my dad, try to get hold of him. But he wears hearing aids and doesn't wear them at night and didn't hear the phone. So I'm calling and calling and calling, and I finally got hold of him and told him what was happening. I loaded Dakota up in the motorhome and took my laptop for work, and I figured, I'll be back later. It's just one of those events. I got around the corner and about 2 blocks away, and the town was already on fire. The fire moved at 8 football fields a minute. It was just, amazing. Within a half an hour, it went from 20 miles away to the town was engulfed, and we were desperately trying to evacuate. And
when you were driving, did your car get engulfed in flames, or were you able to stay ahead of the fire?
No, I was surrounded by fire. I had to drive through fire on the road because it had been windy. You know, the pine needles and leaves and stuff had fallen into the road and they were on fire. And so we're driving through this stuff on fire. The sides of the road were on fire. Then we have just single lane roads each way going up and down the ridge. And they had converted all the lanes to go down the hill. And I had my Jeep attached to the back of the motorhome so I would have a way to get around and do work. So I thought. And people were coming back up the hill, splitting the lanes, yelling out the window, you have to turn around, they're not letting you go down the hill. And I'm thinking, I can't turn around on a 2-lane road in a motorhome towing a car. So I pulled over at the nearest flat spot that I could find and unhooked the Jeep so that I wasn't dragging that around. And it took me about an hour and a half to go what normally takes me 8 minutes to get to my dad's house because we were moving so slow. And all of this time, the fire is just getting bigger and bigger. And before I knew it, it was pitch black outside, like a really dark night with no moon, because of all the black smoke and the blocking of the sun. And you're driving through town and everything is fully engulfed in flames, and you're just going, oh my gosh. I had no idea how much of the town was impacted, just the part that I was trying to get through. Took me about 9 hours to get off the ridge that day. It was just terrifying. There was nowhere to go. Trees are falling in the road, blocking the roads, and they wouldn't let us go through. But when we finally got the photos of our houses and things, we couldn't believe how many people's houses, 14,000 houses, 95% of all the structures in the town burned.
That's unbelievable. How far did you have to drive in order to get to safety?
It was about 15 or 20 miles is all it was, but because of the traffic and the few roads out of town, and the fire have knocking trees over, it took about 8 hours. A lot of people perished on the road in their cars because the cars weren't going anywhere and they caught fire. About 88 people, I think, in the fire died. But you know, as fast as that fire moved, if it had started 2 hours earlier, we'd have all been in bed and there'd have been no warning for anybody. It was my nephew. Yeah, he was at work down the hill, and had he not done that, I wouldn't have had any kind of advance warning. And for sure, I'd have left the house, and my dog would have been home by herself. I couldn't have gotten back to her. So, you know, I'm so thankful that he had the idea to even call me. But the fire moves so fast. I mean, it's not like something that you can see for miles and you get warnings and you better, you know, prepare. It was less than a half an hour from the time he saw it until the town was engulfed. You know, and it's just amazing how fast it moved. And then when I finally got back into town, it took them about 3 or 4 weeks to get things at a place where they would let people back into town to see their properties. Um, it looks like a disaster zone. You know, if you watch those war movies where they have bombs embedded, where everything's just black sticking up sticks, that's what paradise looks like today.
And will they rebuild the town, or?
They're trying to. They're trying to, but you know it's one of those circular problems, right? Because it's a small town, doesn't have a lot of money. All of their people are gone. Nobody can live there. The water right now, there are some houses that didn't burn. It's amazing how fire works. You'll have a whole block completely destroyed and one house survived. You know, but because of all the contaminants in the water from the airborne stuff and from the plastic pipes below ground that burn, there's a lot of benzenes in the water, and so there's no water that they can run right now. They're having to truck in tankers to operate stuff for the workers that are up there. The town wants to rebuild, but when there's nobody that lives there, the businesses that didn't lose their structures, they've got no customers, right? And how long can you go like that without leaving or going bankrupt? And people don't want to go back to town to try to rebuild because there's no businesses and it looks like a disaster zone. So it's really one of those. There are a lot of hardcore people that that's my town, I want to go back no matter what. But it's going to be years before that town can be a town again. 3 to 5 years is my guess, at least. Or I have actually moved to a different area. I'm over actually in the Santa Rosa area right now, which is about 180 miles away, just north of San Francisco, about 50 miles.
Have you always been a professional animal trainer, or was there an evolution in your path to becoming a trainer?
Oh, there was definitely an evolution. Like almost every dog trainer alive, it's, you know, animals have always been a magnet to me, but I was actually in the high-tech world for 30 years. I started off when I was 18 in the semiconductor industry and learned about how to manufacture semiconductors and grew in the management chain. In the last 10 years or so, I was a project manager for Intel. And I was responsible for transferring the new technologies to other facilities around the world. So, and then, you know, while I'm doing that, I have dogs and stuff, and I got involved in dog training professionally through an organization in the Bay Area. And then, you know, I kind of followed around a dog trainer for a while. Then I taught classes for a while. Then I went to school and learned the technical side of dog training. And I was just sucker. There was no other choices then. And once you understand and start learning about how dogs learn, how dogs do stuff, it just, you know, I'm a dog behavior geek now. But and then in 2008, I decided when Intel was going to shut down part of their business, that would be a good time to jump off and go full time. Little did I know the economy was going to die at the same time, but I survived it, right? But see, I already had the house and stuff, and you know, I had a mortgage that I could afford no matter. I could work at McDonald's if I had to, so I wasn't too worried about being able to survive at that time. But yeah, I've loved it, but it's it's a struggle sometimes. I miss the sabbaticals that are paid, and I miss the the paid vacation and all that stuff that you get with corporate jobs. But I don't miss the other stuff. I like the dogs.
Do you remember like the very first client and the dog that you had as a brand new trainer?
I do, in fact. It was the very first client that I had as a professional was in Paradise. It was an older fellow and his wife who had a white standard poodle named Prince. And poor Prince just could not live up to the reputation of their previous dog. He was a puppy. He was about a year old, and this guy was in his 70s and didn't walk very well. And he wanted Prince to walk better on a leash than he was. And all he kept saying is, "My other dog this and my other dog that." And it's like, I remember teaching him that he has to work with the dog that he has and not look back at the dog that he had, because more than likely the other dog wasn't perfect at a year old either. But yeah, I do remember, and it was very sad when I heard that he had passed a few years back. But yeah, it's amazing.
Do you have a particular favorite thing about being a trainer, whether it's working with the dog or teaching the humans about how to effectively shape behavior?
Probably my favorite thing about working with the dogs, aside from the dogs themselves, right, is when you see the humans have that aha moment about what their dog is doing and why they're really doing it, that it's not really dominance and all this stuff, and you can see them shake their head and go, "Oh, okay, I didn't understand that," and now you just changed the relationship with the people and the dog, right? So the conflict that oftentimes is right in the center of some of the dog issues starts to change. And then when you have these people that are now asking questions and watching how to shape behavior and how to manage the environment, you just now did the biggest step you could possibly make in keeping that dog in his home. That's probably my favorite thing. I mean, I love the dogs more than most of the people, like most dog trainers, because it's just the dogs are always pure and just in the moment.
If I don't know anything about animal training and science-based behavior modification, if I was looking to hire a trainer, what are some like key points that I should look for to ensure that my trainer indeed knows what they're doing?
Oh, good question. That's one of those ones that I usually advise people that first, that the dog training industry is not regulated, so that anybody can go out there and call themselves a dog trainer. And usually what I'll say in a conversation like this is that, you after this phone call can hang up and go create a website and a phone number and call yourself a dog trainer. And when I say that, the look on people's faces, there was a lady I talked to just the other day who was telling me about this behaviorist that she had hired to do some work with her dog, and I wrote that behaviorist word down, and I asked her if she knew, where her behaviorist was educated, got her degree, and she said, well, she didn't know, and I asked for the name, and I looked her up while we were talking, and she's a dog trainer. She's, she's CPDT, and she's been around, but she's not a behaviorist, and then when I explained to her what was going on with people using terms and titles that really aren't theirs. So starting off with one, where were they educated? Do they have dog trainer courses behind them? Are they medical backgrounds? I also let people know in very respectful ways that veterinarians, most of them aren't behavior people. Most veterinarians have not had much behavior training. And so when they're asked questions, they're susceptible to using Google just as much as some other people are, so that they have to ask their veterinarians, where they got that from, and do they have any info to back it up, right? So if it sounds like it's too harsh, it probably is, and you have to question it and understand why that has to be done that way.
What are some buzzwords that folks could look for while they're maybe scanning a website that would show, oh, this person is science-based and force-free?
Exactly. Well, certainly looking for some of those words: force-free, science-based. Looking for the terms reward or reinforcer. Looking for information that has the dog being taught what to do as in being told what not to do, right? So if you hear terms like dominance, if you hear terms like alpha, if you hear terms like correction, be very wary. And then I point people to different kinds of locations to look for positive dog trainers, right? Websites and things. But yeah, it's looking for the how to teach the dog what to do as opposed to what not to do. And a lot of websites are very cryptic, as you well know. You've probably gone through many of them, looking at them. Yeah, and I even have a hard time sometimes figuring out what the methodology is, because some of these crossover trainers or balanced trainers, that's another word to look out for, balanced. They've learned that if they put too much out there, they block a whole host of people. So they kind of ride the positive wave to get people suckered in, and then they explain why some dogs have to have certain things done to them, or I also have them look at pictures on websites. Look for choke chains, look for pinch collars, look for e-collars versus body harnesses and those kind of things. If you have dogs that are wearing that stuff in pictures on websites, those trainers use those tools. But and then when I'm talking to people, I ask them to talk to the people that they're interviewing and ask them questions. And so rather than saying, are you a positive trainer or do you use corrections, I point people to asking a very specific question. I tell people, in fact, I told a lady yesterday who's looking for a dog daycare. And I told her, I said, tell them that your dog is a crazy jumper and you want to know what they do to stop the dog from jumping all over them. You're having a hard time, to have any advice for you. And if they tell you to step on his feet or squirt him or hit him or whatever, don't take your dog there. If they talk about turning around, walking away, rewarding, sitting, other things, the probability is that's what they're going to do at those places. Because people who use punishment aren't going to tell you specifically what they do positively if they don't, right?
That was a brilliant way to get the information out of the people without sort of having the daycare get defensive, or that's really smart.
Some of these these businesses, they've gotten real savvy about people fishing. And if you go out there and say, well, are you a positive trainer or a reinforcement trainer, or do you use punishment, that tells them what you're looking for. But if you actually engage them and ask for their advice, oh my gosh, I'm having all this trouble with my dog, how do you fix this stuff? How do you fix barking? This is driving me nuts. And they start talking, e-collar or squirt bottles. Don't go there.
I was actually looking at your website before we got on to speak, and I noticed you offer a humans only course. I thought that was a fantastic option, especially since, seeing Terry work with her clients and knowing that essentially 90% of the work is for the human anyways.
Yeah, that's one of those things I'm beginning to grow. My website's actually being redeveloped in the background as we speak, because one, it's an old HTML site that I can't do anything with. And two, because I've moved to a new location, I need to update geography stuff. Yeah. Otherwise, I'll be having a hard time getting local clients. Yeah. But what I have found is that when I've done my group class orientations, for example, that's always a humans only course. And I spend time in that course talking about why dogs do stuff, how to management, debunking some of the dominance theory stuff, and giving some people. And it's amazing in that class how much people come in. Some people come in, this is stupid, I'm wasting my time. And you actually see them relaxing, and then they cock their head and they start shaking their head, and then they start asking questions. So you get that going. And like you said, the majority of dog training is really educating the people. And I find that oftentimes if I'm doing the training with the dog, whether it's day training or in classes, the people take a step back and they kind of disengage. And the dog builds a relationship with me. And he builds the understanding that, oh, this one pays all the time and this is what's going to happen. But when the people step back in, they really aren't going to do the same stuff that I do. But if I actually step behind them and coach them to do all this stuff, and not have the dog see me as this greatest thing that comes into their house, it'll help the people get better. But I have some dogs that, the clients that tell you, I'm not going to use food. You can train my dog, but don't use food. That after the first targeting training session, they don't care about food anymore because they can see their dog. And then when their dog has the most fantastic recall, on the word touch, you got them hooked, right?
You get the light moment.
And then you have these dogs that were considered to be these terrible creatures by their owners, who now they're just so proud of them. So